Hi. So again, we're coming back to The Political Mind by George Lakoff, and we're going to talk about why hawks win. This is actually literally a chapter 16 in The Political Mind. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the research that George Lakoff refers to by Kahneman and Tversky. And so if you're thinking in just purely economic terms about global affairs, you'll start to understand this just a little bit. So I'm going to list off these ones that are all here. People think in terms of gains and losses relative to a reference point. So you can picture that, right? So am I going to gain more or am I going to lose more relative to, so it's very easy to think of this in economic terms, but, right, because money, you get a little bit more or you get a little bit less. People tend to choose frames that highlight gains rather than losses. So the frame that you're looking at, if you prefer to gain, right? Obviously. People tend to avoid losses more than they prefer gains. So they'll take less risks because you may lose your money. Oh, well, as soon as you start thinking you may lose all your money, then you won't do the thing that you may win 20 times your money if you're whatever. People tend to prefer certainty to uncertainty, right? So you know this is a sure thing. If I hold this dollar, I will still have this dollar. If I invest this dollar in buying a YouTube ad to get more people to come and see this, maybe I'll just lose that, right? Like, oh my gosh, that'd be gone, right? And who can be certain about that? People tend to think in terms of prototypical frames. People tend to adapt to a new state and take it as their new reference point. So if so suddenly you adapt to this new state, so you can actually think of that in terms of like the Trump presidency. You're like, oh, I guess it's okay then to just admit to your crimes right on TV. Then okay, now go forward, right? People tend to substitute more accessible frames for more accurate but less accessible frames. So a simplified frame is usually easier than something that's truer but difficult to understand, right? So complex, this is where we talk about complex causation and things like that. So think about these, basically why people will not be rational. It's because of this, right? So you hear about people voting against their self-interest, right? What is the frame that the Donald Trump presidency is really offering for people, right? So in some ways it's a simple term, right? Oh, well, he was a successful businessman, right? They told us on The Apprentice reality TV show that he was a successful businessman, right? That's what they told you. Truth is, I mean, at times he lost more money than everyone else in the United States. Somehow he lost more money than you can ever account for having. He didn't pay income taxes for a terribly long time. So that means that you were just racking up losses to cover any small gains that you were making selling overpriced steaks. So give me a break, right? But the accessible frame is, okay, he's wearing a suit. He's got whatever. He looks good. He's got some, he's got a gold-plated toilet, whatever, right? Like something crazy. And then you're kind of going, okay, well, I can believe this framing about him, even though he won't prove it, right? So, well, he doesn't want to prove it because then he'd have to prove it, right? So you can get caught up in these things, right? So again, thinking in terms of gains and losses, not one to lose, thinking kind of these certainties are happening. So now you can start to understand why people are kind of falling for this idea. Now, this section was called Why Hawks Win. Now, if you were to take that and put it into some kind of militaristic point of view, right? So, oh, should we go to war? Ooh, we could win something in this war, right? So they framed up, the certainty of winning in Iraq. the potential losses, we don't want to again be attacked, right? So, you got to be worried about this. The idea, the warning comes in the form of a mushroom cloud, right? So some of these things which were irrational losses, because always, if you ever watch one of these spy shows, right, like a comedic spy show like Chuck or something like that, cut the red wire and the thing it didn't work, right? So it doesn't blow up. So there are a lot of steps before that mushroom cloud, right? There's a lot of things that will make that mushroom cloud hard to happen. So it's not rational to worry about something so silly. So not silly, sorry. If you are concerned about this, and you should be concerned of proliferation of nuclear weapons, just because they're useless, right? It's only because they're useless that it's not a good idea to have weapons that could blow up the Earth, 150 times. Like every surface of the Earth could be blown up to unrecognizable 150 times just by the American arsenal alone, or, causing all kinds of problems, right? So why are we plugging a bunch of money into a thing that we should never use as a deterrent to something that other people shouldn't use? And, I guess if you're in a doomsday situation, don't attack people who would be willing to use a nuclear weapon against you. Okay, well, that's noted, right? But shouldn't this just lead to a different kind of economy? Shouldn't we be understanding this differently? So now we know we can't go to war in a conventional way between two nuclear powers. Not in a because if someone's about to lose, right? This is a lot of temptation to use that weapon of last resort. So you have this stupid weapon of last resort that we can't use, and it stabilizes something at some level. If, as Sting said, hope the Russians love their children too, right? Rather than, so I grew up, my teen years are in the 80s, 1980s. And, there was a significant concern, enough concern in my mind that I'm thinking about this a lot. I'm thinking about what happens when this happens, right? Now, yes, we have some major unstable players in the game, right? We have Trump, we have Putin, we have other people that, shouldn't have access to nuclear weapons, that may be developing them, all those kind of things. But so the hawks, right? So let's talk about Iran for just half a second. So the Iran deal that was made with Obama was that, hey, we're going to get rid of all our yellow cake uranium. We're going to get rid of all this. We're not going to be able to upgrade beyond this percentage. We want to use nuclear power because we, really think that even though we have all this fossil fuel here, that the carbon infrastructure has to be, we have to be responsible too, maybe. But of course, obviously they're developing it so they can develop nuclear weapons. But if they had nuclear weapons, what's the worst? What's the situation once Iran has them? Then you can't attack them, right? So it stabilizes things a little bit. So why should anybody have these ridiculous weapons? Nobody should. But does it stabilize things? And can we push the frame into something else? So now the losses are very obvious, right? So if you're going to go up against a nuclear power, the potential losses are so obvious that, it's kind of crazy to do it. However, when Russia, annexed Crimea, when they did that, it's easy to say, hold on, you blew it, right? Here's the economic pressure. By the way, the economy of Russia is not doing great, right? Partly because Putin and his friends are just taking all the money and putting it in their pockets, right? But partly because there's a lot of sanctions on them. But then you've got this irrational actor, Trump, in the office of the president. And because of the history of the presidency, people aren't able to act against that and stop that, really nonsense stuff. So hawks then win because they play on all these factors that we mentioned before. So you can be optimistic about, we're always going to win, because there's a bias to be more optimistic, right? There's a bias to say that it's always going to work out, right? Not that if you look at the history of the Iraq conflict under George W. Bush, total failure, right? Like immediately, by the time the mission accomplished banner goes down, there's Fedayeen or something like that. There had been these weird battles, basically suicide battles, against American forces, right? Or against the coalition forces, which were mostly American. So you've got this moment of what's going on here? I wonder if these guys are going to fight back, and they are, right? You were able to drive your tanks through Baghdad, and nobody was there. There's not a single person on the street as these tanks roll through, as these armored personnel carriers roll through. No opposition at all. But then where there was opposition, it's concerning, right? Because America has done great in a conventional war, right? So one of these new ideas, because right now people are talking about who's going to be, after Eliot Engel, who's going to be the chair of the Foreign Relations Committee. So one of the ideas from one of the people are going for this position, and I don't know their names, Meeks, I think. Meeks, Castro, and one other guys. But thinking about this role that people are generating as if China will be our next conventional war, right? Like they want to gin up this idea because in a conventional war, China should know this too. If they sink an American aircraft carrier, which they definitely could, right? They could decide to do that, or they could use nuclear weapons or whatever, right? They could do this disproportional thing, and then, holy cow, a lot of stuff goes wrong, right? For them, for us, a lot of things could go wrong. But the fear of it makes people, we need some kind of special missile system that's going to, blah blah blah. Maybe it could knock them out of the sky. Star Wars, right? We want to have Space Force. Silly stuff. Silly stuff to be, maybe somebody could think of a rational reason for these things. But the hawks will say, well, we got to prepare for this. Guess what we do terribly with? Guerrilla warfare. Or, somebody just being driven to the brink and they're willing to put, you do a suicide bombing. Just imagine, like, the historicizing versus the mythologizing, right? So people put this onto the religion of Islam, and in this case, maybe there's something to that, right? So you say, well, could you be, could your religion manipulate you into doing something? Sure. Obviously, that it's in order to get one of these quotes is from Richard Dawkins. I had heard it was, for a good person to do good is just rational. For a good person to do bad, you need religion. Now he's a strong atheist, and you think about this, to get someone to go bomb a healthcare facility that's providing women's health and sometimes providing abortions, to get that person to go blow up or kill a doctor or something like that, that really takes some kind of next level stuff. But if you oppress systematically a culture, a society, a whole group of people, there's going to be people who can grab onto that religion and manipulate it so people will go ahead and do something horrible. And then you could blame it on the religion, or you could blame it on the situation, or you could blame it on both, right? Because ultimately, everything's involved. So if you're America now, and we're competing against, say, China, and we expect a conventional war, well, yeah, it's going to go good. No, it's not going to go good. Like thousands of people, millions of people potentially could die in a real, certainly in a nuclear conflict, but even in a conventional conflict. So let's not, right? What actually works better than attacking Iraq? Buying their oil at dirt cheap prices, right? Oh, but they're an unstable actor. They don't like, whatever. I've got some human rights argument for that. Well, the human rights, yeah, we want more universal human dignity. So let's get on that, and let's try to use economic pressure. And if it's a genocide, we need to stop that with armed conflict. I understand. Again, it's a conversation in progress, so you could kind of discuss what's the best way to stop a genocide. But I think usually you have to get involved pretty quickly. But maybe even before the genocide, you could be dealing with that stuff earlier. And are there economic pressures that are leading to that terrible state? So it's complex, right? The Hawks will win because they can play on that list that I had gone through before. They can play on this this optimistic bias, this tendency to kind of falsely attribute the motives of the other person as mean motives versus being as a result of the situation, right? Like so you could say, oh, these are just terrible people, or you could say, they're desperate, right? They're like they need to be able to eat. So different efforts instead is universal food. Oxfam.org is trying to organize this. This is not a serious problem. Like, this is a serious problem that people have food insecurity. It's very destabilizing to think that you don't know how you're gonna eat. And it's a relatively simple problem because there's so much food being made. It's just hard to distribute it. So if you've got that kind of situation up against desperation, right? It's easy. So if you were to invest in the world, invest in growth rather than invest in control, then you would get a lot further along, right? So we have to be ready for these arguments when we start to go, well, what if we just went in there and took it all, right? What if you just bought it at bargain basement rates? In the United States here and with Canada, there's, we should, the United States, some guys say, we should take over Canada. Well, it wouldn't be that easy, right? And what do you get out of it? You get any resource from Canada at the market rate. You get free trade with Canada. Just buy it. What's the problem? So, you see what I'm saying? This is kind of being open to these, getting ready to beat down hawks when they say, oh, it's got to be war. It doesn't make sense. War is not a great answer to these things. So there we go. But there's a lot of forces and why they will tend to do that. All right, this is a conversation in progress. You got ideas about this, or this triggered something for you, go ahead and put it in the comments, please. We'll check those out. Also, be sure to like and subscribe. Thank you so much, and talk to you soon.